How's it going, everyone? Dakota here. I figured I would do a mix tutorial or kind of show like some of the things I'm currently doing with my mixes. Yeah, I haven't made one of these kind of videos in a while, so figured it was time for another one. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Um, I do a, well, I guess I should probably show you what it sounds like when it's done. That would make sense, wouldn't it? So this is what we're working towards. Yeah, so if you like how that sounds, you can stick around and watch the rest of the video. If not, this video is probably not for you. So I'm going to start where I would normally start a mix, which is with obviously nothing on. I usually start from a template similar to this. Not this exact one. It changes song to song, but this is pretty consistent and this is pretty consistent because it's just a starting point for me. So first thing I like to do is just have some EQ, adding some low end and some upper mid range around 5.5K to the mix, kind of simulating what a mastering chain would be like. I'm using this manually. I'm demoing it. I don't normally use this. Honestly, I go back and forth between a bunch of different EQs for this part right now. I haven't really found one I'm happy with. This one's cool. The, what is it called? The Chandler Curve Bender one's pretty cool. Honestly, any of them work. And then I use this Air EQ, adding 20K. So this one's adding like mid-range and low end. This one's adding like really high top end and more low end, but like sub. So like super low, super high, kind of low, kind of high. That's kind of how I have it broken up. And then I bring down the trim level a bit, and I have this here in case I need to do it more before I go into my compressor, which this is like an SSL style compressor. I'm usually going for about, no more than like 4 dB. I'm not going to show it right now because I bypass all the plugins. The gain staging is going to be really messed up. And then that goes into a tape saturator. This is the soft tube tape. I like tape A for the master bus. I think it sounds cool. And then that goes into a limiter. So pretty kind of standard stuff, I think, for a lot of modern mixers. Nothing really special going on. So yeah, and then that's where I start. I start the mix with those things on. And then I always start with the kick drum because that's where everyone ever has started drums or a mix. I don't think anyone's ever started not on a kick drum. Sometimes I start on room, but not today. So this is how the kick drum currently sounds. So I have a kick. This is the P4 kick. And then a kick sample, which is the original Halpern library kick, the 22x16 one. You can see levels here. So it sounds good, but it's kind of abrasive. I don't really like abrasive kick drums. I like pillowy kick drums. So first step is some EQ to cut down on some of the abrasiveness, get rid of some of this like muddy mid-range and high pass. Yeah, so pretty simple. Basic, kind of standard EQ for kick drum, I think. Nothing really special going on there. MJUC for the compressor. I really like this compressor on kick drum. I use, depending on what I'm going for, I'll use different ones. Sometimes I use the Smashing Grab from GGD, or I'll use some kind of distressor emulation. I probably use the distressor emulation the most, but I've been using this one a lot lately. I just like what it does, especially with these density, high ratio, and I think eye stage things with this punch. It keeps the intensity of the kick. Like, it doesn't kill the low end when you compress it, but it still rounds off the top. It gets rid of some more of that clickiness, makes it less abrasive, makes it a little bit more pillowy and squishy. Yeah, a whole lot of what I try to get with the kick drum is this pillowy sound it has the attack to cut through, but it's not abrasive. And that's going to be emphasized more with this tape. I like to use the B for kick drums. It does more of what I was just saying, where it rounds off the top end, but keeps it present, rounds the bottom end, but doesn't make it get like woolly. So yeah, and then just turning it down. So yeah, to hear that before and after. So basically it's the same kick drum sound, just cleaner. Moving on to snare. So this is what we have before. First step is some EQ, really basic EQ, cutting off some low end, getting rid of some ringing frequencies, getting rid of these, I call them sneezing frequencies because it sounds like someone's sneezing or, hitting a piece of paper with a pencil, and then adding some top end. FabFilter Pro G, just to make the snare shorter. I basically do this on all my snares because I like to get a lot of the space and length of the snare from room samples and reverbs. So yeah, it's just cutting down on the length. It makes it a little bit easier to fit it into the mix, I have found. Smash and grab. This is like my go-to snare compressor. It just makes snares sound like I want them to sound. Yeah, adding some saturation to round off the transients some. And then doing that even more with this finality to just trim off the most abrasive part of the transient. Cool. And that's the snare. And then I added a snare sample, which is just the snare high foreign room of the original Halpern library. And this is the same settings as my room over here. So I've just got low cut, high boost, compressing the crap out of it, using FabFilter Saturn to distort the mid-range. You can see I'm not really doing much here, but I'm distorting quite a bit in the mid-range. And then getting rid of some boxy frequencies. Really just trying to add air and top end to the snare drum. And all three of those together. Toms, again, really simple and straightforward. I'm just using a transient designer to cut down on the sustain, kind of what I did to the snare. And then FabFilter Saturn to basically EQ it. This is a trick straight from Eric Valentine and Nolly. Keeping the low end clean, distorting the mid range but lowering it, and then distorting the top end a lot. Let me get more toms. Yeah, and that setting, all these settings are the exact same. So this setting was just copied over onto each one. Overheads, also just really simple. I try to keep my mixes pretty simple. EQ, cutting out low end, cutting out harsh frequencies, and boosting some top end. You know, this spot here is just really, making room for guitars, abrasive frequencies, and just a little bit more abrasive frequencies. This is primarily from crashes. This is just a really sensitive part of the hearing for, people. And this is like that area where it clashes with like vocals and guitars and things like that. And then Soothe, the most magical plugin on the planet. It does exactly what the name implies. I don't like to stereo link it. I like to keep them separate. That way, if something's happening on the left and a cymbal gets hit on the right, the cymbal on the right, if it doesn't have those abrasive frequencies, it's not going to get those cut out of it and make it sound like empty or hollow. So that's like the most important thing I do with this. Yeah, that's overheads are really simple. That's basically all. Sometimes I compress them, but in this mix, I'm sending them to parallel compression, so I didn't feel like I needed to do that. And then room mics, again, it's literally just these exact settings that we went over before, so I'm just going to go through them. I'll show you a before and after, but it's literally no different at all, except I added Soothe at the very end. Again, stereo link at 0. So I'll show you the room before and after. And then all the drums together. So yeah, that part of the mix is pretty simple. It's a lot of just EQ and then compression. A little bit of saturation here and there, but nothing really special. So I didn't really, spend too much time on it. Got other stuff I want to get to. But one cool part of my drums that I do like, and I'll talk a little bit more about, is my parallel compressors, which I like to use two separate ones. I use this Neve 33609, which really emphasizes the transients, and I use this Arouser one, which is a little bit more, it kind of smears the transients, and I can blend them to taste. If I don't use this Arouser, a lot of times I will use the Fatso. I have a preset that I made for this that I also like, but for this mix, I used the Distressor, and I will send only the shells to the 33609 to really emphasize transients. I'll show you that. So you hear the transients just become a little bit more. But then I send the whole kit to the Distressor, which adds more of like the room and that depth. Yeah, so as you saw, I was bringing those up there to show you how they sound separately. And then drum reverb, I really like this. I really like 480 style reverbs. You'll see them elsewhere in this mix. I love how they sound. I usually just pick a preset and roll with it. Somewhere around a second is good for me. And then I like to cut off the low end, boost the top, just to get air. I'm trying to get air out of this. And I apply this to my snare and my toms. So yeah, it's just adding a little bit of extra space and dimension to it. Yeah. And sometimes if I feel like the snare or something doesn't have enough body, I'll add another reverb that's usually like a short gated reverb or something. I like to use the this one, RMX16, and I'll use nonlinear. I'll just keep it really short, and that's for if I want to add like body. But I didn't do that here because I didn't feel like it needed it. Whoops. And yeah, and so that's the whole drum mix. You can see I have some room automation depending on the part of the song, but that's the only automation for the drum. Cool. Moving on to bass. I've got basically a low and an amp. So I'll just show you what the DI sounded like. I'm using my Ibanez. Oh, what is it? It's one of the SR series. 2605, something like that. I forget exactly what it's called. Yeah, I think it sounds really good. It's nice and clear. It stays in tune really well. It's got a nice growl to it. It's a good sounding bass. So, first thing I did was compress it. Get just the low end. And then limit it. And that's the low end of the bass. Nothing special going on there. For the top end, oh, good Lord. So one thing I like to do before I go into an amp sim or something is I like to EQ the DI. And so I would have been making these moves as I was messing around with the amp, which I use this well-rounded preset from Will Putney. I don't think I adjusted any of this. I think I only adjusted this. So I would have found this preset I liked and then added an EQ beforehand. And I guess this is just what I decided I needed to do, which is add low end, cut some of this, add attack, cut out abrasiveness. I'm assuming that's what I'm doing. It's funny how this looks like massive moves, but it actually doesn't sound, it just sounds cleaner. It sounds like the same DI, but cleaner, which is why I like to do this. I do this basically anytime I reamp or use an amp sim. You'll see me, I know I do it on Guitars Do, but I don't think it's this extreme. This is quite a bit, but I don't know, it worked. And then I go into Tone Hub. And I'll show you this without what I had done before. So you hear it doesn't sound different. It sounds the same, but cleaner. And it has more of the stuff that I'm looking for, basically. Next is Spiff. I like to use Spiff on the top end of the bass to get rid of some of that like slappy fret stuff. And then high pass to make it fit with the low end. And when I did this, always check your phase because most of the time they're out of phase, but in this case they weren't. So combine those. You get a pretty good bass sound to start with. And then we EQ it. So first thing I did, let's just add a little bit of more of the stuff that I like and cut out. This was like a ringing frequency I found. Next, oh, good Lord. So apparently I went really hard on bass this time around. Normally my EQs don't look like this, but I would have been making these moves in the mix. So I don't even know. Let's just hear what it does. Yeah, so you can see cutting frequencies I found harsh, boosting, mid-range to make it cut through, and I guess I just needed more low end. Cleaning up the low mids. Yeah. Like I said, these are moves I would have been making in the mix. I would not have just been sitting here and solo doing this. I would have had drums going. In fact, I'm almost positive what I did was I got to this point, I then mixed the guitars, and I brought the guitars in, and then I made these moves with the guitars. Because you can hear, even without the plugins activated on the guitars, it kind of fills them out. It fills out like that crunchy part of the guitar and glues in the low end of the kick drum with the guitars. It makes the guitars and the drums sound like one more cohesive thing. MB2, or Fat Filter Pro MB. This is sidechained to the kick drum. So this part ducks out whenever the kick drum gets hit. This is just keeping the low note consistent. This is keeping the mid-range consistent. And this is getting rid of like anytime I go up on like the higher frets, if they become too pokey, it lowers them in volume. Basically just keeping it really consistent, and then again, more consistency with the limiter. So I actually did quite a bit there. That sounds quite a bit more drastic than starting off, but it's what I had to do to make it work in the mix. Nice. And then rhythm guitars. These are pretty simple. Let me go over the actual tones. So for this one, I used a 5150. Again, I did this. I EQ'd, this stuff as I'd already picked out my Sims. So I went with Putney Big and Bold preset. I think I lowered the gains on these, and that's it. And then that's the same on here. So let me show you those. Get rid of all this shit. Just 5150s. And then I like to combine amps. So then I used a Triple Crown. This is the same EQ as the 5150. And then I use this 3 Crowns preset, again lowering the gain because his presets have tons of gain. And this is how that sounded. And then I just kind of messed around with the blend until I liked it. So first things first, multiband compression to tame the palm mutes. A big note here is that I have stereo link at 0, meaning that the left and right channels will compress separately. So obviously I'm human. I don't hit the exact same every single time. And so this way I can, the left channel is not going to get compressed the same as the right channel. And I find that if you compress them together, it just ever so momentarily sucks them in together during palm mutes, and that's not what I want. So, and you can see it's really only activating on palm mute sections. There's a part later. So you can see during like ringing note parts, it's not really doing anything. I'm trying to get it to where it's only happening during palm mute parts. EQ, it looks messy, and it, I guess, kind of is. But it's a lot of notching, ringing frequencies, cutting out harshness, and then just boosting some top end, some mid range. Yeah, basically just cleaning it up. And then the boost would have been made with the mix going to make it fit. Soothe, again, the most magical plugin on the planet. Stereo link at 0. And then I guess I turned it up. And so guitar and bass together. And then with just cool. So that sounds pretty nifty. Next would be these low gain guitars from the intro. Again, I did the exact same thing. This is the same EQ. Found a preset I liked. Crunchy something. Putney guitar. 39 if you're interested. EQ. Again, cutting harshness, boosting some stuff to make it fit in the mix, high and low pass with some resonant filters. Magic. And that was it. That was all I did to those guitars. Really simple. This intro part with some like clean guitars. Again, same thing. Putney preset, 42, nice breakup. The Vox AC30. EQ. It looks like this is the exact same EQ as the other one. Soothe. So that's pretty boring, but then we got to make it interesting. Ping pong delay, lots of saturation, or not lots, but quite a bit. Space echo, I love the space echo delay. .480. Just really trying to add ambience, and then probably just that's doing nothing. Cool. this lo-fi guitar towards the end for a little interlude. Octave overdubs is what I used. I remember I turned down the gain quite substantially on this one. These are massive cuts. This is just what I had to do to make it sound the way that I wanted it to sound. There's no rhyme or reason to it. This is what it took. Soothe. 480. This is quite high because I wanted it to sound like really distant in this part. For leads, I have this post-rock lead. These drones. Evos, which are fun. And these are all just basically, as you can see, presets from Archetype Nolly. This one's literally called post-rock lead. This one's called washed out. And then this is articulate lead. I don't know if they're adjusted, but that was my starting point for them. And then I applied the same thing to each one, just EQ to make it fit in the mix, adding top end, cutting out harshness, adding mid-range, cutting mud, cutting low end. To make it soothing. This to make it a little bit less abrasive and push it back in the mix, because I want all of these aren't necessarily leads, they're more like ambient sounds. And then I have some effects. Again, I added the same thing to each one. It's just cutting some low end, cutting mids out of the middle of the spectrum to keep the sides intact, getting rid of harshness, and then boosting top end and the sides to make them a little bit wider. I'll show you what this sounds like. So you can hear it really just pushes them to the sides. And then reverb to push them back into the mix. This is just a sub, nothing special. And then my little mastering chain I have over here, I'll just go over it really quick. I like to use another stage of compression afterwards. This is a great compressor. I use different settings for this one, lower ratio. I'm only looking to do about like 1 dB. And then even then, I turn down the wet dry signal to 40%. So it's doing a little bit, but it kind of glues everything together a little bit more in a different kind of way than the other compressor. This I'm using for some stereo width and making everything under 80 hertz mono. This I'm just keeping the low end more consistent, but also boosting it. This is also just a nice check for me because I know when I'm mixing that if this, when it gets reduced, is hitting at about, 0, I know my low end's about in the right spot. Gullfoss doing whatever Gullfoss does. If you don't know about this plugin, look it up. It's like a really fast active EQ that does just magic. Vertigo, slightly distorting the entire mix. I've only got it mixed in like 20% on the top and bottom. And then multiband compression, just lightly touching all the major parts a little bit. It's not doing too much, but it just kind of keeps everything a little bit more consistent. About -6, we're hitting -5.5, so. And that's everything. So yeah, if you guys have any questions or you want to see more tutorials like this, let me know. If you want to see videos on how I dial in guitar tones, how I dial in bass tones, anything, just leave it in the comments below. And yeah, thanks for watching.